Jasmine Crockett, a modest woman, entered a luxury car dealership, and within minutes, she found herself at the center of an intense confrontation. But what led to her public humiliation in front of other customers simply because of her humble appearance? And the biggest surprise of all, she's not who you think she is. Can Jasmine turn the tables and make those who mocked her face the consequences? This story will leave you in awe and change your perspective on racism, human dignity, and justice. Are you ready for an incredible comeback? Jasmine Crockett stepped into Boston Luxury Motors, a showroom glowing with an almost ethereal light, as if the luxurious cars displayed were more than mere vehicles. They were emblems of status, wealth, and power. Each car stood still, bathed in soft artificial light, its sleek curves and polished exteriors reflecting a world far removed from Jasmine's own. The Rolls-Royce Phantom sparkled like a crown jewel, its price tag in the millions, casting an air of exclusivity and grandeur. Jasmine, however, entered wearing simple attire, her brown hair tied back in a ponytail, a white t-shirt fresh but plain, paired with faded jeans and worn sneakers. She exuded an effortless elegance, but not the kind that could be measured by price tags or designer labels. She looked nothing like the typical clientele of such an upscale dealership, but that didn't concern her. Today wasn't about her. Today it was about Caroline. Caroline, her sister, had just beaten cancer. After all the pain, chemotherapy, sleepless nights, and endless hospital visits, Caroline had held on to one dream: owning a car like one of these. It wasn't an extravagant wish for someone like Caroline, just a simple dream, something she could never afford. But now, after all they had endured, Jasmine wanted to make that dream come true. As she stepped into the showroom, however, the warmth of the dealership seemed to shift into a chilling atmosphere. The silence in the air grew heavy, thick with judgment. Jasmine felt the weight of the gazes around her, eyes lingering too long, heads turning in subtle disapproval. The finely tailored suits, expensive watches, and designer handbags gleamed like badges of distinction, while Jasmine stood there as an uninvited presence in this world of wealth and vanity. It was like stepping into a space where she didn't belong. Blake Thompson, the sales manager, stood by the front desk, greeting customers with practiced charm. Tall and sharply dressed in a tailored suit, his hair perfectly styled, Blake looked every bit the part of someone who belonged here, used to dealing with people of power, status, and wealth. But when his eyes landed on Jasmine, there was no warmth, no smile. Only a quick, dismissive glance that took her in from head to toe. Without so much as a polite greeting, Blake turned away, uninterested. In his mind, Jasmine was just another passerby, someone who didn't fit the mold of the customer he was used to, someone who didn't deserve his time. Jasmine, undeterred, walked toward a deep blue coupe. Her sneakers clicked softly on the glossy tile, the sound too loud, too simple in the midst of the luxury that surrounded her. The showroom felt cold, and the car, though stunning, seemed to mock her, reminding her that it wasn't meant for someone like her. But Jasmine wasn't there to admire. It wasn't about her. She was there to make her sister's dream a reality. Blake, seeing Jasmine lingering near the expensive car, felt a momentary discomfort. Something didn't sit right. He couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't the type of customer to walk away with a checkbook full of zeros. He exchanged a brief glance with one of his junior sales associates, then subtly gestured toward Jasmine. The message was clear. She wasn't his responsibility. "Excuse me," a voice interrupted Jasmine's thoughts. It was Daniel, a younger sales associate, his tone kind and warm. "Can I assist you with something? Perhaps you'd like to take a closer look at the features of this car." Before Jasmine could respond, Blake intervened, his voice cold and harsh, freezing the air around them. "Thanks, Daniel. I've got it from here." His eyes swept over Jasmine, dismissing her without hesitation. There was venom in his smile, a smile that wasn't meant to comfort, but to remind her of her place. Blake's gaze flicked to the blue coupe, then briefly to the used car section. "You sure you're in the right place?" he asked, his voice dripping with subtle contempt. "This is a very expensive car. Perhaps you'd like to look at something more Within your range. The words hit Jasmine like a slap. She stood frozen for a moment, the weight of his judgment settling in. He hadn't said it directly, but she felt it, the implication that someone like her had no place in the presence of such wealth. That she, with her simple clothes and modest style, was beneath it all. She glared at Blake, her chest tight with a mix of anger and disbelief. But she didn't react. She didn't let him see how deeply his words had stung. Instead, she turned her attention back to the blue coupe, refusing to back down. This wasn't for her. It wasn't about her. It was for Caroline, and nothing, no matter how patronizing or cruel, would stop her from making that dream a reality. Blake's voice remained unyielding. "If you'd like, I can show you some of our used cars," he said, as if offering her the leftovers meant for someone like her. "They might be more your style." Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't even glance at him. The entire dealership now felt suffocating. Every glance, every whisper, every judgment. She could feel the other customers' eyes on her, watching, whispering. She was an outsider here, an anomaly in a space reserved for those who fit the mold, those with money, those who had value in the eyes of people like Blake. But Jasmine refused to let that define her. She wasn't going to let him or anyone else make her feel insignificant. She fixed her gaze on the coupe, the glossy blue paint reflecting her own determined expression. Daniel, standing a few feet away, noticed the tension in the air. He hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward again. "Miss Crockett, if you're interested, I can show you other options. Perhaps something more suited to your needs." His voice was soft, almost apologetic. He could sense the tension and didn't want to add to it. Jasmine turned toward him, her voice calm and steady. "Thank you, Daniel, but I'll wait." Blake's expression hardened. He wasn't used to being ignored, especially not by someone like her. He clenched his jaw and crossed his arms, watching as Jasmine stood unwavering, unaffected by his cruelty. In that moment, Jasmine realized something. It wasn't about the car. It wasn't about the judgment she faced. It was about showing Caroline that, no matter what the world said, she would always fight for what was right. And no one, not Blake, not anyone, would take that from her. The silence in the showroom was deafening. The tension was thick, the air heavy with unspoken words. Jasmine stood her ground, unshaken, as the world around her moved in slow motion. All of them were oblivious to the quiet strength unfolding before their eyes. Jasmine Crockett stood before the sleek blue coupe, her eyes filled with hope and determination. This was the car she had dreamed of for months. A perfect gift for Caroline, who had bravely fought and beaten breast cancer. Every detail of the moment felt like fate. The dream Jasmine had been working toward wasn't just for herself. It was for someone who had suffered so much. Yet, as she stood surrounded by gleaming luxury, the stares from those around her weren't filled with curiosity or admiration. They were filled with skepticism and, more painfully, disdain. The customers, dressed in designer outfits and holding high-end handbags, eyed her from head to toe. Their glances were sharp, their judgment instantaneous, as though her mere presence sullied the pristine atmosphere of the showroom. Jasmine could see a blonde woman, clad in a form-fitting black dress, smiling with barely concealed mockery as she watched Jasmine pass. The look on her face was one of disbelief, as if she couldn't comprehend how someone like Jasmine could even be in this space. It wasn't just a glance. It was a message. "You don't belong here." Jasmine couldn't shake the sting of racial prejudice that burned behind every look, every whisper. It wasn't just about her clothes. It was because she was black. The customers around her didn't see her as a potential buyer. They saw her as an intruder, undeserving of the luxury that filled the room. "I bet she couldn't afford that car," one woman whispered, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. The room seemed to freeze, and Jasmine felt every set of eyes snap to her. Some filled with pity, others with judgment. Not a single person spoke up. Not one voice rose to defend her or challenge the cruelty that hung in the silence. Jasmine pressed her lips together, unwilling to let them see how deeply their words had hurt her. But the sting was undeniable. Blake Thompson, the sales manager, stood nearby, watching the entire scene unfold. He looked at Jasmine once more, then shifted his attention back to a group of well-dressed men in expensive suits. The contrast between them and Jasmine was glaring. His gaze, filled with thinly veiled contempt, flicked back to Jasmine for a brief moment. He shook his head imperceptibly, his mind already made up. She's not worth my time. What Blake didn't realize, what none of the people around her could understand, was that Jasmine wasn't just a woman in simple clothes. She wasn't merely a black woman who seemed out of place in a luxury car dealership. Beneath her unassuming exterior was a woman of incredible strength and achievement. She was the founder of a charity that had saved thousands of disabled children's lives. She was a successful entrepreneur with financial means that could rival anyone in that room. But none of that mattered in this world, a world where outward appearance determined your worth. The racism Jasmine felt in that moment was something none of those wealthy customers could ever fathom. They looked at her with cold, judgmental eyes, as though she were a foreign object in a world they believed belonged to them. She was a stranger here, a disruption to their orderly world of high status and privilege. Suddenly, a well-dressed middle-aged man, clearly in his late 40s, approached her. He stopped just short of her, as if unwilling to get too close. With a quick nudge, he elbowed the woman beside him, leaning in to whisper, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "She looks like she couldn't possibly afford to own something like this, don't you think?" The words rang out, cutting through the air with such force that it seemed like the entire showroom had heard the cruel judgment. Jasmine's face flushed, her heart pounding in her chest. The humiliation of the moment was unbearable. Yet she stood still, trying to steady herself. She wanted to confront the man, to call him out for his cruelty. But before she could even speak, another voice interrupted. This time colder, sharper. "You won't be able to afford this one," Blake said from behind her, his voice dripping with superiority. "We get people like you here all the time, but not everyone can actually pay for these cars." The words hit Jasmine like a slap. She didn't say anything in response. Instead, her chest tightened as the sting of his dismissal cut deeper. How could he judge her so carelessly without knowing anything about her? She had nothing to prove to him. Yet here she was, reduced to nothing more than a stereotype, a woman unworthy of stepping into a world like this. Blake's voice continued to echo in her ears, his words like a heavy weight pressing down on her. "If you'd like," he added with mock politeness, "I could show you some of our pre-owned vehicles. They might be more within your budget." Jasmine didn't speak. She didn't need to. The hurt was evident in the stiffening of her posture, the way her shoulders tensed. She could feel the heat of the judgment surrounding her, a heat that seemed to draw everyone's attention. Even though no one would dare speak out against it, she was the outsider here, the one who didn't belong. But something inside her began to shift. The deep, suffocating pain of the moment couldn't take away her resolve. As she stood before the coupe, the disappointment and hurt began to transform into something else, something stronger. A flicker of defiance sparked within her. She wasn't here for their approval. She wasn't here for anyone's validation. She was here for Caroline, for the woman who had fought through cancer, and for the dream Jasmine was determined to make a reality. She turned her gaze back to the blue coupe, the polished chrome and gleaming finish catching the light. It wasn't just about the car. It was about standing her ground. Jasmine knew she could afford it. She didn't need anyone else to believe in her. She just needed to believe in herself. In that moment, the weight of their prejudice no longer felt like an insurmountable barrier. It felt like a challenge, and Jasmine, with every ounce of dignity she had left, accepted it. She wasn't going anywhere. Jasmine stood there, her hand resting gently on the blue coupe, as if searching for a sliver of hope in the cold, sterile light of the luxury car dealership. Everything around her seemed to blur, fading into the background, leaving only the glaring discrimination in every glance, every whispered word from those around her. Blake Thompson, the sales manager, stood off to the side, his eyes fixed on her. He was observing her every movement, every step she took, every word she spoke, as though she were nothing more than a specimen under a microscope. Blake approached her, but not to help. No, this was his opportunity to continue the disdain he had shown since she walked into the showroom. A mocking smile spread across his face. Not a smile of welcome or joy, but one of smug satisfaction. A pleasure derived from seeing someone he deemed unworthy occupy the same space as him. "You really think you can buy this car?" Blake's voice rang out loudly, dripping with sarcasm and ridicule. He emphasized the word can, as if to suggest the very notion of someone like Jasmine owning such a car was laughable. "Cars like this aren't for people like you," he continued, his words echoing in the tense air, making the surrounding space feel even more suffocating. The sting of shame began to rise in Jasmine's chest. Blake's words weren't just mocking. They were a denial of her worth. She felt as though she were a stranger in this world, treated as though she had no right to exist in this space, no right to dream of anything good. She could sense the mocking looks from the other customers around her. A few were even chuckling softly under their breath. They exchanged glances with each other as if the situation were a joke, a spectacle for their amusement. "She can't possibly have the money, can she?" One of them whispered loud enough for Jasmine to hear. "I thought only people like us could buy these cars." The weight of their words pressed heavily on Jasmine. She could feel the racism in every syllable, in every dismissive glance. The pain wasn't just in being judged by her appearance. It was in being deemed unworthy of the good things in life simply because of how she looked. The sense of shame welled up in her, but she refused to let it overtake her. Blake wasn't just a rude sales manager. He was a symbol of the systemic discrimination that ran rampant in society. He didn't think Jasmine could afford the car, not because he knew anything about her, but because he had already judged her based on her appearance. For him, that was enough to dismiss her as undeserving. Jasmine stood there in silence. Blake's words reverberated in her mind, but she refused to let them dominate her. She pressed her lips together, her gaze unwavering as she once again looked at the blue coupe. She wasn't going to give in to this. No matter how much they mocked her, no matter how hard they tried to diminish her, she wasn't going to let them win. She wasn't going anywhere. Daniel, the young sales associate, stood at a distance, observing the interaction unfold. He felt a deep discomfort, knowing what Jasmine was enduring. He wanted to step in, to say something, to defend her. But Jasmine's quiet strength left him uncertain of what to do. He could only stand there, helpless, watching as Jasmine faced the unjust treatment alone. The sting of Jasmine's hurt was almost unbearable. She wanted to leave. She wanted to walk away from the humiliation, to retreat to a place where she wasn't judged for the way she looked. But no, she stood her ground. Her eyes remained fixed on the car, her resolve stronger than ever. She knew her worth. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone here. She had the right to dream, to desire, and to achieve whatever she set her mind to, regardless of what anyone else thought. Jasmine's heart burned with fierce determination. This wasn't just about a car. It was about something far bigger. It was about showing the world that no one could define her value based on her appearance. No one. With every ounce of strength she had, she held her ground. The judgment, the mockery, the racism, they couldn't touch her. She was more than their preconceived notions. She was Jasmine Crockett, and she would not be silenced. Jasmine stood there, close to the blue coupe, a car she had envisioned as the perfect gift for Caroline. She gazed at it, appreciating the flawless details of the vehicle. And for a moment, a sense of warmth washed over her. But that peace didn't last long. A cold wave of judgment soon crashed over her as the stares from the people around her intensified. Every movement, every step she took was met with scrutinizing eyes filled with disdain and contempt. The sales associates in the dealership couldn't help but glance at her repeatedly. Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that she was an outsider, someone not deserving of their attention. Not the kind of customer they would want to serve. A few of them whispered among themselves, casting glances that dripped with judgment, as if she didn't belong in such a luxurious space. Even the customers couldn't stop staring. An older couple, dressed in formal attire, exchanged looks that were unmistakably full of mockery, as though they were silently laughing behind her back. "She's probably just here to dream," the younger sister muttered, her voice low but clear enough for Jasmine to hear. The sneer in her tone was unmistakable. Jasmine couldn't help but feel the sting of that comment. The people around her weren't much better, casting fleeting glances, sizing her up, as if she didn't even exist in this world they occupied. The feeling of being an outsider, of being looked down upon, tightened around her like a suffocating net with every step she took. Those eyes felt like sharp daggers, digging into her heart. No one spoke aloud, but each glance, each shake of the head from the others, seemed to scream, "You don't belong here." They looked at her like her mere presence was an intrusion, a reminder that she wasn't worthy of being in a space where appearance and wealth defined one's place. Every look made her feel smaller, less important, less human. Jasmine couldn't help but wonder why this was happening. Why was she being treated like this, just because she wasn't dressed in expensive designer clothes? Why did her appearance automatically label her as less than everyone else? She thought back to all the times she had been treated this way, when her skin color had been the first thing people saw, when the subtle but painful discrimination had become part of her everyday life. She wanted to confront every one of those cold stares, to challenge their assumptions. But the pain inside her kept growing, a pain that couldn't just be washed away. Just then, Blake Thompson, the sales manager, walked over. His eyes weren't filled with any warmth, no friendliness, only cold disdain. He looked at Jasmine for a moment before casually turning to speak with another associate, whispering loud enough for Jasmine to hear. "People like her can't afford to buy a car like this." The words were like a blow to her self-esteem. Blake's words, combined with his cold stare and the judgment from the others, felt like a public dismissal. She couldn't help but feel like she was invisible in this world, just a stranger in a place that clearly didn't welcome her. The shame surged inside her, a tight knot in her chest. How could they treat her this way, just because of the way she looked? Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that she was seen as less than human, less than worthy of standing alongside the people who were deemed worthy in this place. It wasn't just about the car. It was about being cast aside, treated like an outsider in a space that should have been open to all. Jasmine felt a crushing sense of loneliness, as if she couldn't change anything, couldn't fight back against the coldness and the judgment that surrounded her. Every look, every whispered word cut deeper into her heart, but she refused to let it break her. She didn't want to show weakness in front of these people. She would not let them see how much their judgment had hurt her. In her chest, there was still a flicker of defiance. A quiet flame burned inside her, one that refused to extinguish. Daniel, the young sales associate, stood off to the side, observing the exchange with unease. He saw Jasmine's struggle, the weight of the situation pressing down on her, but he didn't know how to help. He felt powerless and embarrassed, not only because of the blatant discrimination Jasmine was facing, but also because he couldn't summon the courage to defend her. Jasmine could feel the injustice of it all, but still, she stood tall, refusing to let their judgment define her. The cold stares, the whispers, they couldn't reach her. She knew who she was, and she wasn't going to let anyone take that from her. Jasmine Crockett felt as if she were standing on the edge of a cliff, where every glance, every word from those around her was a blow to her self-esteem. The cruel words from Blake Thompson and the scornful glances from the customers around her still echoed in her ears. The humiliation and pain surged within her, but Jasmine refused to lose her composure. She scanned the showroom. Now it felt like a foreign world, a place where people's worth was measured by what they owned. Luxury cars, designer clothes, and expensive accessories. Jasmine felt like an outsider, unwelcome and unworthy of being in this space. It was a world that valued appearance over substance, wealth over character, and she had never felt more detached from it. But despite everything, she made the decision not to let this insult break her. Jasmine closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath as she fought to control the rising emotions within her. Despite the pain, she wasn't going to let the racism and the shame diminish her strength. She had faced much worse in her life, and this was just another challenge she needed to overcome. She stood tall, turning her back to Blake without offering any rebuttal. She refused to argue or allow herself to become the center of this provocation any longer. But before she walked away, she turned back one final time, her gaze steady and resolute. "My worth is not in the clothes I wear," she said softly but firmly, her voice strong enough for those around her to hear. The words were a declaration of who she was, a reminder to herself and to them that she didn't need to prove her value through her appearance, through her modest clothing, or the wealth that others measured her by. She didn't need their acceptance, especially not from people who couldn't see her for who she truly was. She had worth independent of their shallow judgments. With those final words hanging in the air, Jasmine walked away, stepping out of the showroom without looking back. She didn't feel ashamed of the discrimination she had endured. Instead, she felt stronger than ever. She wasn't there to entertain or please them. She was there for something far more significant. She left that place with her head held high, knowing that she had the strength to walk away from anyone who couldn't recognize her true worth. After Jasmine left Boston Luxury Motors, walking away with both resilience and deep hurt, no one could have predicted that her silent exit would trigger a dramatic shift in the very environment she had just faced. The dealership, still in shock from Jasmine's departure, was about to witness the arrival of a figure no one could have anticipated. Jason, Jasmine's tech mogul billionaire brother, stepped into the dealership with an air of undeniable confidence and authority. A sleek Rolls-Royce Phantom glided to a stop in front of the dealership. The wheels turned slowly, as if time itself had to pause to welcome Jason's arrival. This wasn't just an expensive car. It was a symbol of power and success, something few in this world could ever hope to attain. As the car door opened, a tall man stepped out. Jason wore a sharp black suit paired with an elegant tie, and his eyes radiated decisiveness. His salt and pepper hair was neatly combed, reflecting the refinement and professionalism he embodied. But what truly stunned everyone was the name that accompanied his appearance. He was Jasmine's brother, a man none of the people in the dealership knew by his true identity. Jason was a powerful figure in the tech world, a billionaire known for his revolutionary inventions that had changed the world. But no one at the dealership knew he was connected to Jasmine, the woman they had just unfairly judged for her modest appearance. The eyes of the entire dealership quickly shifted from the blue coupe Jasmine had stood in front of to the Rolls-Royce Phantom and the powerful man making his way inside. Before anyone could process what was happening, Jason's arrival completely transformed the atmosphere. The astonished and disbelieving looks of those in the showroom shifted to him. Blake Thompson, the sales manager, stood frozen, unsure of how to react upon recognizing Jason, someone whose position and influence far surpassed anyone else in the room. A wave of shock swept through the space as it dawned on everyone that Jasmine, the woman they had so carelessly mocked and dismissed, was married to one of the world's most powerful billionaires. The looks of contempt from the customers and staff were replaced with admiration, respect, and a hint of fear. Blake, realizing the magnitude of his mistake, quickly moved toward Jason. His face flushed with embarrassment as he realized the woman he had belittled was the younger sister of one of the most influential entrepreneurs on the planet. As Jason walked in, the entire atmosphere in the dealership shifted. The once cold sales associates immediately became polite, bowing their heads, eager to serve him. The customers, who had been whispering just moments ago, fell into stunned silence, as if they were suddenly struck by the truth. Jasmine Crockett, the woman they had just assumed was merely dreaming of a car like the one she had admired, was in fact far more than they could have ever imagined. They realized how wrong they had been and how much they had allowed their own biases to guide their actions. Jason's entrance wasn't just marked by the luxury of his car or the wealth he commanded, but by the story behind him, one that no one in the dealership could have predicted. It was a story of power, success, and an unspoken truth about how appearances could be deceiving. And in that moment, everything changed. The atmosphere in Boston Luxury Motors shifted, becoming almost suffocating as Jason stood in the heart of the showroom, his presence commanding the room with unyielding confidence. His eyes were steady and unwavering as he scanned the faces of everyone present. His calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the tension that seemed to fill the air, and it was clear that the moment of reckoning had arrived. What had just happened, the quiet departure of Jasmine, the subtle but unmistakable prejudice she had faced, was about to be overshadowed by a truth no one in this showroom could have anticipated. Blake Thompson, the sales manager, stood frozen in place, his posture rigid and his eyes wide with disbelief. He had no idea what was coming, no inkling that the woman he had dismissed so casually, the one he had looked down on because of her simple appearance, was the younger sister of a man whose power, influence, and wealth surpassed anything Blake or anyone else could fathom. As Jason moved toward him, the shift in the room became palpable. The staff, once cold and judgmental, could only watch in silence. A sudden, uncomfortable realization hit them all at once. The woman they had so harshly judged, the woman they had so easily disregarded, was married to one of the most powerful tech billionaires in the world. Jason's steps echoed through the showroom as he approached Blake. His eyes locked onto Blake's, and the weight of his gaze felt like a challenge. He wasn't angry. He wasn't shouting. He was simply calm. Calm in a way that made Blake's unease grow tenfold. And as Jason began to speak, his voice filled the space with quiet authority, ensuring that every word carried the gravity it deserved. "Jasmine is not just my younger sister." Jason's voice rang out, his words like a force of nature that cut through the murmurs of the room. "She is the founder of the Collins Foundation, one of the largest charitable organizations dedicated to supporting disabled children. Her work has changed the lives of thousands of children, providing them with a future they might not have had otherwise. She does this work without asking for recognition, without ever seeking the spotlight." A hush fell over the dealership. The silence was so profound, so heavy, that it felt like time itself had come to a standstill. Blake stood there, mouth slightly agape, as the words sank in, one after another, hitting him harder than he could have ever imagined. The other sales associates, who had watched with disdain as Jasmine walked through the showroom, now found themselves utterly speechless, their faces flushed with shame. The customers who had been lingering nearby, those who had exchanged knowing glances and dismissed Jasmine as someone who didn't belong, now found themselves stunned, their mouths closed in shock. Jason continued, his gaze still fixed on the blue coupe Jasmine had admired earlier. "Jasmine isn't just a woman who could buy this car in an instant," he continued, his voice unwavering. "She could buy this entire dealership if she wanted to, but she doesn't, because she doesn't need material things to prove her worth. Jasmine's value is in the way she improves the world around her. Her worth lies in her actions, in the lives she's touched, in the legacy she's building. It doesn't lie in the things she owns." The words landed like a shockwave, reverberating through the entire showroom. It was as though the walls themselves were shaking as the truth unraveled everything the dealership had stood for up until that point. Blake, still standing frozen, could not hide the shock on his face. His mind struggled to process what was happening. How had he misjudged Jasmine so severely? How had he allowed his bias to cloud his judgment so completely? The other staff members, who had once looked down on Jasmine for her unassuming appearance, now averted their eyes in shame. They were suddenly confronted with their own failures, realizing they had been complicit in treating someone with such disdain simply because of how she looked, unaware of the depth of her achievements. Their respect for Jason wasn't just because of his wealth or his status, but because of the undeniable truth that Jasmine, his younger sister, was someone whose worth far exceeded any material possession. Blake, still unable to form coherent words, stood there visibly flustered as the reality of his actions hit him hard. He had mocked Jasmine, assumed she didn't belong, and treated her like an outsider. Now, standing in front of her brother, one of the wealthiest men in the world, he felt small, reduced to nothing more than a figure who had allowed his prejudice to define his actions. "Do you understand now?" Jason asked. His voice calm, yet carrying an undeniable edge. Jason spoke. "Jasmine is not some dreamer who doesn't know her place in the world. She is the epitome of success. But her success is not measured by the things you value in the showroom. It is measured by the lives she's touched, the people she's helped, and the future she's creating for others. That is the true measure of her worth." The words were a punch to the gut for everyone in the showroom. They couldn't undo the harm they had caused. They couldn't take back the way they had treated Jasmine. the way they had dismissed her as unimportant simply because she wasn't wearing a designer label or carrying an expensive handbag. The judgment they had passed was irreversible, and no amount of money or status could change that. They had been blind to the truth, and now the truth was impossible to ignore. For a few long moments, the dealership stood in stunned silence. Blake's mouth moved, but no words came out. The customers and staff, all of whom had been so quick to judge Jasmine, now stood frozen, unable to meet anyone's gaze. The faces that had once shown contempt now reflected shame. Jasmine, still far from the showroom, had no idea that her silent departure would trigger this revelation, this undeniable truth. The mockery, the judgment, and the prejudice she had endured were now exposed for what they truly were. Nothing more than shallow judgments based on appearances. And in that moment, Jasmine's quiet strength, her resilience, and her refusal to be broken by their ignorance had not only altered the course of her own life, but had shattered the delusions of those who thought they could measure a person's worth by what they wore or what they owned. Jason's words had changed everything. The power of truth was undeniable, and it left behind a silence that spoke volumes. Despite the shockwaves caused by Jason's appearance and the revelation of his relationship with Jasmine, she remained unchanged. She stood there, her hands still resting on the blue coupe she had admired earlier. But this time, there was no sense of loneliness or hurt lingering in her heart. Instead, she felt stronger, more grounded, and more resolute than ever before. While Jason had defended her, confronting the discrimination Jasmine had faced, she didn't need that protection. She didn't want his help to become a weapon of vengeance against those who had insulted her. Jasmine knew that fairness and respect couldn't be measured by retaliation or confrontation. They came from each person recognizing the true value of another human being. "I don't need your protection, Jason," Jasmine said softly, yet her words carried an unwavering firmness. "Thank you for standing up for me. But this isn't about revenge or creating conflict. What I want is for them to realize that a person's worth isn't in their appearance or in what we own, but in what we do and how we treat others." Her words not only surprised Jason but also made Blake Thompson and the other sales associates pause. They hadn't expected Jasmine, the woman they had so recently deemed unworthy, to have such an independent and self-assured attitude. There was no anger in her voice, only calm determination and quiet conviction. Jasmine didn't need an apology from those who had hurt her. What she wanted was for them to understand that discrimination had no place in this world. She knew that respect couldn't be forced. It had to be built through empathy and mutual understanding. She turned to face the customers around her, not with eyes filled with anger, but with a gaze full of quiet confidence and peace. She didn't want to make herself a victim. She wanted to be a model of resilience, proving that no amount of discrimination or injustice could ever change a person's true worth. Jason stood beside her, a bit surprised by his younger sister's steadfastness, but he understood that Jasmine wasn't someone who needed outside protection. She only needed to be treated with fairness and respect. Nothing more, nothing less. Silence hung thickly over Boston Luxury Motors after Jason had revealed his relationship with Jasmine and her significant accomplishments. The eyes of Blake Thompson and the sales staff had shifted from disdain to shock. But this sudden realization didn't spare them from confronting an uncomfortable and painful truth. They had been wrong. Blake stood alone in his office, facing the guilt that had steadily risen in his chest. He stared at himself in the mirror, asking himself why he had allowed discrimination and bias to cloud his judgment. He had prided himself on his ability to read customers and make quick assessments. But now, all he saw was the collapse of his professional integrity. Blake had always considered himself a competent, skilled professional who could handle any situation with precision. He prided himself on evaluating clients accurately, assessing their worth and potential quickly. But this time, he had made a grave mistake. When he saw Jasmine Crockett, the simple woman who walked into the dealership, he let her appearance blind him, failing to assess her based on the true worth of her character. He had made his judgment based solely on her unassuming outward appearance, and that had led to unforeseen consequences. The weight of his guilt was like a powerful wave sweeping away any sense of pride Blake once had. He remembered the mocking glances, the dismissive words he had uttered in those moments. By mocking Jasmine, he wasn't just judging an individual. He was eroding the very trust he had placed in his professional role. He realized that his actions had not only shattered Jasmine's dignity but also damaged his own integrity. But it also threatened the reputation of the dealership Blake had devoted so many years of his life to. Blake turned his gaze toward the office window, feeling the coldness of reality settle in. He knew that, whether he liked it or not, his actions had damaged a significant part of his career. The company would never view him the same way again, and customers would forever judge him based on this one incident. Everything he had worked for, everything he had built over the years, now hung in the balance because of a thoughtless moment. A sense of awakening began to settle into Blake. He couldn't simply remain silent and let this go. His conscience was rising within him like an unstoppable tide. He knew that regret couldn't undo the damage, but he also realized that in order to make amends, he had to do something meaningful. He couldn't let this racism define him. Blake turned back toward his desk, the weight of the atmosphere pressing down on him, the regret and guilt enveloping him. But there was a shift within him, a turning point. He knew this was the moment he had to confront the truth, admit his mistake, and find a way to make things right. But the question remained, would he have the courage to face the consequences of his actions? The day after the events at Boston Luxury Motors, Blake Thompson found himself unable to escape the overwhelming sense of guilt. The images of Jasmine, her dignity shattered by his actions, replayed in his mind, reminding him of how profoundly he had misjudged her. The harsh words he had spoken to her and the way he had let his biases guide him haunted him like a constant shadow. He knew he could never erase the hurt he had caused, but he also understood that if he didn't act, the regret would continue to torment him for the rest of his life. For hours, Blake grappled with his own conscience. He had always prided himself on his ability to judge people accurately, to understand who was worth his time. But this time he had failed miserably. He had assumed that Jasmine's modest appearance meant she was unworthy of his attention when, in reality, she was a woman of great influence and purpose, far more accomplished than he could have imagined. His actions had been a direct contradiction to the very values he claimed to uphold. He knew he had to take responsibility for his mistake. He couldn't just walk away from this and pretend nothing had happened. That morning, Blake made a decision he had never thought he would make. He would apologize to Jasmine, but he understood that an apology alone wouldn't be enough. He needed to do more than just say the words. He needed to prove that he had learned from his mistake and that he truly understood the gravity of what he had done. He couldn't simply ask for forgiveness. He had to show that he was committed to changing the way he viewed people and the way he treated others. Blake began to research the Collins Foundation, the charity Jasmine had founded to support disabled children. He dug deep into the foundation's mission, its programs, and the impact it had on the lives of countless children. He read about the children Jasmine had helped, the lives she had changed, and the difference she had made without ever seeking recognition. Blake was stunned by the scale of her work, the lives she had touched, and the hope she had brought to families who had no other resources. He was humbled, realizing just how far removed his own judgments had been from the reality of Jasmine's life. She wasn't just some dreamer, as he had once thought. She was a force for good, someone who had dedicated her life to making the world a better place. And Blake had, in his arrogance, treated her as if she were nothing. The more Blake learned about Jasmine and the work she did, the more his guilt grew. He was ashamed of himself, not just for the way he had treated her, but for the realization that he had failed to see her for who she truly was. Jasmine wasn't just a woman in simple clothes. She was a leader, an activist, and someone who had built something powerful out of pure compassion and dedication. He had reduced her to nothing more than her outward appearance, and in doing so, he had missed the essence of what made her remarkable. Determined to make things right, Blake contacted Jasmine and asked if he could meet with her. He knew she might not be eager to see him, and that forgiveness might not come easily, but he couldn't live with the weight of his actions without at least trying to make amends. He needed to show her that he was willing to change, that he was capable of doing better. When they finally met, Blake didn't just offer a simple apology. He wasn't there to smooth things over or make excuses for what he had done. He came with a genuine desire to express his remorse and to demonstrate his commitment to change. "Jasmine, I know that just saying I'm sorry won't undo what I did," Blake began, his voice shaky but sincere. "I can't take back the things I said, and I can't erase the hurt I caused you. But I'm truly sorry, from the bottom of my heart. I can't keep living with this guilt. I need to make things right, and I want to do something that actually matters." Jasmine listened quietly, her expression unreadable. She didn't rush to respond, but she could feel the sincerity in Blake's words. She knew this wasn't just a hollow apology. It was the first step toward something deeper, something more meaningful. Blake wasn't just asking for forgiveness. He was acknowledging the harm he had caused and expressing a desire to make amends. Blake continued, his eyes filled with resolve. "I want to be a part of the work your foundation does. I want to help the children you've been helping. I want to contribute in some way, not just to atone for my mistakes, but because I've learned that what you do, what you've built, is something that truly matters." Jasmine paused, her thoughts swirling. She wasn't sure if Blake had truly changed or if this was just a way to assuage his guilt. But as she gazed into his eyes, she noticed something different. A genuine desire to make a difference. It wasn't about his ego or attempting to win her forgiveness. It was about realizing that there was more to life than status or appearances, and that true change comes from how we choose to treat others. After a long moment of silence, Jasmine finally spoke. "Forgiveness isn't easy. It's not something I give lightly," she said, her voice calm but firm. "But I believe that people can change as long as they truly want to. You've shown me that you're willing to try, and that's something." Blake's heart swelled with relief, but he knew this was only the beginning. Jasmine's forgiveness wasn't a free pass. It was a challenge to prove himself, to show her and everyone else that he could be better. "I don't expect you to forget what happened," Jasmine continued, her gaze unwavering, "but I do expect you to show that you've learned something from it. Not just for me, but for yourself and the people you'll help along the way." Blake felt a weight lift from his shoulders, but it wasn't just relief. It was a sense of responsibility. He had been given a second chance, and he knew he couldn't waste it. He was determined to make a difference, not just by apologizing, but by taking real action. In the days that followed, Blake dedicated himself to volunteering at the Collins Foundation. He worked with the children, helped with fundraising events, participated in donation drives, and did whatever was necessary to support the foundation's mission. But more than that, he found a deep sense of fulfillment in the work. It wasn't just about making up for his mistakes. It was about becoming part of something meaningful, something that had the power to change lives. Blake was no longer just a man burdened by regret. He had found a new purpose in life, one driven by a sincere desire to make the world a better place. His actions spoke louder than any apology ever could. And with each day, he proved that change wasn't just possible. It was happening right before his eyes. Blake Thompson, once proud of his expertise and personal success, now found himself at a charity event for the Collins Foundation, surrounded by children with disabilities, each receiving help and opportunities to live a better life. Blake couldn't help but reflect on the profound changes he had undergone. His past actions, marked by shallow judgments and material pursuits, now seemed like a distant memory, eclipsed by the person he was slowly becoming. The first steps on his journey to rediscover himself had begun. Gone was the Blake who had been obsessed with sales, profits, and climbing the corporate ladder. Now, he was deeply involved in volunteer work, eager to help others without expecting any compensation or material reward. A newfound sense of awakening had taken root within him as Blake began to understand that even the smallest actions could bring about significant change in the lives of those less fortunate. At a fundraising event for the Collins Foundation, Blake watched as children with disabilities smiled brightly, receiving gifts and help from the organization. These children, who might not have had perfect appearances, radiated confidence and happiness, making Blake reflect deeply on his own life. He saw himself in these children, people who had once been marginalized and looked down upon by society. But thanks to support, they could now smile and live fully. The realization that he had missed out on this deeper beauty for most of his life struck him hard. Blake stood quietly, watching a small child happily playing with a toy the Foundation had given. It was in this quiet moment that the weight of his transformation hit him fully. He suddenly understood that throughout his life, he had never truly seen the real beauty of a person, measured through their soul and capacity for love. He had always evaluated everything through appearances, power, and wealth. But now he saw that true value wasn't found in superficial gloss. It was found in what people did for the world and how they treated each other. This awakening didn't come from grand speeches or profound declarations. It came from the small, meaningful actions he had witnessed while participating in the charity's activities. Blake began to understand that the discrimination and judgment he had once perpetuated wasn't just a personal mistake. It was part of a larger societal problem. The way we judge and treat those around us based solely on external appearances. As Blake watched the children play and interact, he began to feel a deep sense of shame when he thought back to his behavior toward Jasmine Crockett. He realized the gravity of his earlier actions, how he had wrongly judged her solely because of her modest appearance. He had failed to see the true value of the woman in front of him, someone who had accomplished so much and had given so much to the world. Now, as he looked at the children around him, Blake could not ignore the lesson he had learned, the painful, humbling truth about the way he had treated others. The harsh judgment he had cast upon Jasmine felt like a mirror reflecting his own failings, his own inability to see the worth of others beyond the surface. He had been blind to what truly mattered. The shame Blake felt was not only a result of his actions toward Jasmine, but also a broader realization of how much he had failed to recognize in others. Over the years, he had been caught up in a world where wealth and appearance dictated worth. And in doing so, he had lost sight of the deeper truths that truly defined a person's character. As the event unfolded, Blake found himself drawn to the real beauty of the children, not just their smiles, but the resilience and strength that each of them embodied. They had faced challenges he couldn't even begin to imagine, and yet here they were, living with joy and hope. It was in their simple acts of play, their laughter and the kindness they shared with one another were the moments when Blake began to grasp the profound lesson. True success and beauty lie in the heart, in how we treat one another and in the positive impact we have on the world around us. Blake's heart felt heavy with regret, but it was also lightened by a sense of clarity. He knew he still had a long journey ahead, but this moment marked the beginning of a new chapter in his life. It wasn't just about apologizing to Jasmine anymore. It was about understanding the deeper meaning of respect, kindness, and human connection. Blake's transformation had started, and the first step was acknowledging his past errors and realizing that he could do better. As Blake continued to work with the children, offering his help and support, he realized that his time at the Collins Foundation wasn't just about atoning for his past. It was about building something meaningful, about taking the lessons of empathy, humility, and kindness and applying them to his everyday life. For the first time, Blake understood that his true worth wouldn't be determined by the sales he made or the money he earned. It would be measured by the love and respect he gave to others. And in that moment, he knew that his journey had only just begun. After weeks of volunteering and participating in activities at the Collins Foundation, Blake Thompson was no longer the arrogant man who judged others based solely on their appearance. The awakening he had undergone had gradually transformed into a deep commitment to both himself and his community. Blake no longer just recognized his personal mistakes. He also understood his responsibility to drive change and create a more equitable work environment. Blake began to put into practice the lessons he had learned through his volunteer work. He attended training sessions and workshops on social justice and racism, not only to better understand these issues, but also so he could share this knowledge with others. He realized that change couldn't come from just him. It had to be a shift in both mindset and action within the entire team. Blake started engaging with the sales staff, not just those who interacted with customers, but also those in management. He spoke to them about the issues of racism in the workplace, explaining how appearance and societal divisions could affect how a person was treated. One morning, Blake organized a meeting at the dealership aimed at raising awareness among the staff about racism and fairness in the workplace. Everyone gathered in the conference room, and Blake began sharing his personal experiences. How he had misjudged someone simply because they didn't dress like the customers he deemed worthy. He also spoke about the changes he had undergone, learning from Jasmine that a person's value could never be judged solely by their appearance. Blake told the staff about the time he had witnessed Jasmine facing discrimination at the dealership and how she had quietly walked away, not because she lacked the right to respond, but because she wanted to demonstrate that a person's true worth wasn't in how they looked. Through Blake's words, the staff began to realize the severity of discrimination in the workplace. "We're not just selling cars," Blake said, his voice resolute. "We're selling respect, selling fairness. If we don't treat every customer the same, then we're undermining the very values this dealership was built on." He continued, explaining that social justice wasn't just about treating customers equally. It was about creating a work environment where everyone felt respected and treated fairly. Blake encouraged his colleagues to learn more about these social issues and to engage in community service, just as he had been doing in recent months. After the meeting, Blake didn't just receive acceptance from his colleagues. He realized that change wasn't a one-time event, but an ongoing process. Each day, he continued to practice the lessons on fairness he had learned, not just in his professional life, but also in his personal life. He understood that a commitment to change had to be accompanied by tangible actions in order to transform the environment around him. Blake's commitment to these ideals didn't stop at the meeting. He began organizing regular workshops and discussion groups with the team, encouraging open dialogue about discrimination and bias. As he learned more about his own biases, Blake sought to empower others to do the same. He encouraged empathy, stressing the importance of understanding and learning about others' experiences, especially those who had been marginalized. This became a cornerstone of the dealership's new culture, a culture rooted in respect, equity, and genuine care for one another. As Blake continued to embody the values of fairness and equality, the dealership began to reflect these changes. There was a noticeable shift in the attitudes of both the staff and customers. It wasn't an overnight transformation, but Blake was committed to ensuring that the dealership no longer just sold luxury cars. It now sold respect, understanding, and inclusivity, values that mattered far more than the appearance of success. Through his journey, Blake came to realize that real change wasn't just about taking action for a short period. It was about creating lasting, meaningful shifts in how people thought and how they treated one another. The transformation wasn't just in his actions, but in the environment he helped cultivate around him. Blake Thompson, once driven by external measures of success, now led with empathy, understanding, and the deep belief that true success lay in how people treated each other. Every day, Blake continued to practice what he preached. He not only showed up for the children at the Collins Foundation, but for his colleagues as well, offering them the same support and kindness he had learned to give. Through his actions, Blake was demonstrating the importance of lifelong growth and the power of a transformed perspective. Today, the Grand Hall of the Boston Hotel was beautifully decorated with warm lighting, reflecting off the elegantly arranged banquet tables. Jasmine Crockett, the founder of the Collins Foundation, stood at the center of the event, welcoming the guests to a grand charity event, one of the largest she had ever organized. This event aimed to raise funds for disabled children, providing them with opportunities and gifts that would brighten their lives and offer them a chance at a better future. Blake Thompson, who had changed so much since the moment he realized his past mistakes, was also present. At the event, Blake wasn't just attending as a guest, but as a genuine volunteer, eager to make a difference. No longer focused solely on his career, Blake had come to deeply grasp the importance of helping others. As he watched the disabled children smile and laugh, receiving the gifts and support they so desperately needed, Blake felt an overwhelming sense of joy and hope rise within him. Jasmine couldn't help but feel proud as she saw Blake blend into the crowd, assisting with the organization and helping the participants. She realized that Blake hadn't changed just because of her. He had changed for himself and for the impact he could have on the community. His active involvement in the charity event was a clear testament to the fact that everyone had the potential to change. And this transformation didn't just benefit the individual, it benefited the entire community as well. From a distance, Jasmine watched Blake with a gentle smile on her face, feeling a deep joy in her heart. She felt that she wasn't merely the founder of the Collins Foundation, but someone who had inspired another person to change and rediscover the true meaning of life. This was exactly what she had always hoped for: good deeds multiplying and spreading to others. "Thank you for everything you've done, Blake," Jasmine said when they had a private moment to speak. Her words of gratitude were not just a recognition of his volunteer work, but a sincere acknowledgement of the real change Blake had undergone. "You've done something that very few people can. You've found yourself again." Blake smiled, feeling pride from both Jasmine and within himself. He felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders, and he knew that this change was the first step toward living a meaningful and righteous life. After the successful charity event, Blake didn't stop. He realized that life was no longer just about work or personal success. It was about how he lived and contributed to others. He began exploring other charitable organizations and joined volunteer activities to help those in need. Blake didn't just do the bare minimum. He became genuinely involved in projects that would bring lasting value to the community. Blake didn't only help disabled children. He also became involved in social justice initiatives, assisting people who faced discrimination within the community. He understood that true fulfillment didn't come from making money or owning material possessions. It came from helping and contributing to others' well-being. Throughout his volunteer work, Blake learned humility and compassion from the people he helped. He gained valuable insights from the disabled children and the people facing hardships, individuals he had once overlooked. Their stories of resilience and hope taught him that life's true meaning lay in sharing, caring, and helping one another. Blake's transformation wasn't just in his actions, but in his perspective on life. He no longer felt the pressure to prove himself to the world. Instead, he wanted to do meaningful, genuinely good things for himself and for those around him. He began to see that true success wasn't about accumulating wealth or possessions, but about being able to help others and finding joy in doing so. As Blake continued to engage in these volunteer efforts, he realized that his own life had become richer, not in material terms, but in the depth of the connections he had made, the lives he had touched, and the sense of purpose he had found. The joy he felt wasn't from anything external, but from knowing he was making a difference. Blake was changing from the inside out. He had rediscovered what truly mattered. He didn't need validation from external sources anymore. His life now had meaning because he had learned how to give, how to care for others, and how to be part of something bigger than himself. As he continued on this path of self-improvement and community service, Blake began to realize that the greatest success he could ever achieve was not measured in money or status, but in the love, respect, and positive change he brought into the world. Through his actions and contributions, Blake not only redeemed himself, but also inspired others to look beyond the surface and make a lasting difference in their communities. His transformation was living proof that anyone could change, and that true fulfillment came not from what you had, but from what you gave. Time passed, and Blake Thompson was no longer the man he once was. He had gone through a long journey, from discrimination and contempt to genuine remorse and transformation. He had engaged in volunteer work, helped disabled children, and learned from the very people he had once wrongfully judged. Each step on this journey had been part of his process of self-redemption. But one thing he still needed to do, something vital to his growth, was to offer a true and heartfelt apology. One afternoon, after participating in a fundraising event for the Collins Foundation, where he had worked alongside Jasmine, Blake approached her. This time, there would be no half-hearted apologies or empty promises. He stood before her, eyes steady and unflinching. He wasn't just apologizing for his actions. He was acknowledging that his mistakes had affected not only himself but also those around him. Blake truly wanted to make amends for the wrongs he had committed. "Jasmine," Blake began, his voice calm but deeply emotional, "I know that saying sorry will never erase what I've done, but I want you to know that I am truly sorry. I don't just want to change for you, but for myself and for the people I've impacted. I want to learn that change isn't just words, but real action." Jasmine listened. The silence stretched for a moment. She looked at Blake, not with anger or resentment, but with understanding and respect for the journey he had undertaken. She knew that his apology wasn't just words, but the result of genuine change. "I know you've changed, Blake," Jasmine replied, her gaze both gentle and firm. "But change isn't just about words. I want to see real actions." She paused, then added, "But I forgive you because I've seen that your actions over the past few months have shown me that your transformation is real." Blake nodded, his heart overflowing with emotion. He knew that being forgiven wasn't easy, but what mattered was that he had learned a profound lesson, and now he would continue to evolve, not only for himself but for the people he could help. The story of Blake and Jasmine didn't end with a traditional happy ending, but rather with a powerful lesson about the true value of human beings. Their story demonstrated that human worth cannot be measured by appearance or material wealth, but by our actions and how we treat each other. Blake's journey, from discrimination and mockery to self-improvement and redemption, showed that true change starts within each individual. Through learning, growing, and acknowledging his mistakes, he had come to understand that the most meaningful transformation was in how he treated others. Jasmine, despite facing numerous obstacles and discrimination, proved that resilience and self-confidence are values that can never be taken away. She was not just a woman who helped disabled children, but also an inspiration for people like Blake to change and reassess their lives and perspectives. For Blake, he understood that his journey was far from over. But now he had a new goal, not to prove himself to the world, but to live a meaningful life where he could help others and contribute to creating a more just world. The values of respect and fairness would always be the ones he would strive to protect and pass on to those around him. The story concluded with a powerful message that justice doesn't solely come from punishment, but from the change and real actions of each individual within the community. Forgiveness, reconciliation, and mutual respect form the foundation for a more just and equitable future.